The frost came earlier than anyone expected. The cold was not just weather, it was a silent hunter, creeping into every corner of the wooden cabins, biting the toes of children, freezing the water in the buckets inside the house. In a quiet part of the Dakota frontier, the Marlowe family prepared for another long night without heat. Martha Marlowe was only 11, but she had the eyes of someone much older. Eyes that had seen a winter take away too much, too fast. She stood by the window, which was covered with frost on the inside. Her breath fogged the glass, and she wiped it with the sleeve of her dress. Outside, the wind blew across the open land, lifting snow into the air like ghosts dancing in the moonlight. Her mother, Eleanor, was in the corner of the cabin, trying to light the last piece of wood they had. It was damp, nearly useless. But she kept trying. There was no other choice. Her hands shook, not just from the cold, but from the fear that tonight they might not make it. Martha turned to look at her younger brother, Samuel. He was only 5 and had been coughing since yesterday. His small body was wrapped in every bit of cloth they owned, scarves, old shirts, even pieces of a curtain. But still, his lips were pale. Eleanor finally got the fire to catch. Just a small flame, but enough to give a little light and a little hope. She sat back, her face lined with worry and exhaustion. "Marthy," she said softly, "come sit close. We need to stay together." Martha obeyed. She walked over and sat beside her mother, pulling Samuel into her lap. The fire cracked softly, like it was whispering stories from another time, a warmer time. Outside, the wind grew stronger. It howled around the house, and the wooden walls creaked as if they were crying. Martha looked at the ceiling, wondering how many more nights the cabin could hold. Eleanor reached into a small wooden box and pulled out a piece of bread, hard and dry, but still food. She broke it into 3 pieces and handed them out. They chewed slowly, quietly. It wasn't just a meal. It was a way to remind themselves that they were still here, still alive. After they finished, Eleanor did something she hadn't done in a long time. She told a story. She spoke of a girl from the old country, from Ireland, who had hair like fire and a voice like music. She came to the frontier with nothing but her name and her father's coat. One winter night, her voice was carried away by the wind, so cold, so sharp, it stole the sound from her forever. But still, she lived. She worked. She sang in her heart. Martha listened with wide eyes. What was her name? She asked. Eleanor smiled a sad smile. Her name was Anna. But after that night they called her Silence. Martha nodded. She understood. The fire was fading, the cold was returning, and the wind outside, it kept calling, calling names, the morning. Sun arrived without warmth. It hung in the sky like a pale coin, shining but powerless. Martha Marlowe opened her eyes slowly, not because she had slept well, but because the cold had finally allowed her to drift into a shallow sleep just before dawn. Her small frame was stiff. Her legs curled into herself, and her arms still holding little Samuel as if she feared the night might steal him away. Eleanor had already risen. Her shadow moved near the dying embers of the fire, trying to stir it back to life with twigs and dry grass from their emergency bundle. Her breath came in little white clouds. She had not slept at all. "Mama," Martha whispered, her voice raspy. Eleanor looked over, eyes weary but kind. "We're okay," she said, though she wasn't sure it was true. Outside, the snow had fallen hard through the night. The door was half buried now, and the path to the well was gone. Martha stepped outside anyway, boots cracking through the icy crust. Each step was heavy, dangerous. Beneath the surface, the snow sometimes hid weak spots, thin layers of ice over ditches or frozen puddles that could break and twist an ankle. But they needed water. She gripped the empty tin bucket, her gloved hands numb despite the wool. A few feet out she stopped. Something in the snow caught her eye. A dark patch. No shape, no movement. Just wrong. She moved closer. It was a fox, curled in a frozen ball, its eyes open. Martha covered her mouth with her mitten and turned away. Even the wild ones weren't surviving. The ones that knew how to dig, how to hide, how to run. She wasn't sure if that made her feel braver or more afraid. Back in the cabin, Eleanor was rubbing Samuel's hands between hers. His skin was dry and pale, and his breathing shallow. "He needs warmth," Eleanor said, "more than we have." That's when Martha made a decision. "I'll go to the Sullivans," she said. Eleanor turned sharply. "No, it's too far." "It's 2 miles," Martha said. "I can make it before noon." "You don't know how deep the snow is now." "I'll follow the fence line." The Sullivans were the nearest neighbors, a strong family with 3 boys and a wood-burning stove that never seemed to go out. If anyone had extra firewood, it was them. Eleanor stared at her daughter for a long time. The same stare she had given William the night he left to cross the stream. A look that meant, "I know you may not come back." She stood slowly and wrapped her own scarf around Martha's neck. "Take the blue flag," she said, "so if you fall, someone might see you." Martha nodded. Her legs were shaking, but she didn't show it. She was small, but she walked like someone bigger than her years, braver than her bones. The wind pushed hard as she stepped beyond the trees that sheltered their cabin. Every direction looked the same, white, broken only by the wooden fence that zigzagged across the land like an old scar. She followed it, boots crunching, nose burning. Her cheeks went numb first, then her fingertips. Half a mile in, the wind stole the scarf from her neck. She let it go. She had to keep walking. Time didn't move right in the snow. Every second felt like an hour, every step like a mile. She tried to count her steps, but after 500 she forgot how to count at all. Then she saw it. Smoke. A chimney. Hope. She fell twice trying to climb the small hill that led to the Sullivans' porch. Her legs no longer felt like they belonged to her, but she made it. The door opened before she knocked. Mrs. Sullivan stood there, eyes wide, arms reaching. "Martha Marlowe! What on earth?" Martha tried to answer, but no words came. Just a tear. One tear frozen before it could fall. Inside the warm kitchen, wrapped in 3 blankets and cradling a cup of hot milk, Martha finally spoke. "Samuel's sick." Mrs. Sullivan nodded. "You were right to come." Mr. Sullivan loaded a sled. Within minutes, bundles of firewood, extra quilts, and 2 jars of elderberry syrup. "I'll take her back," he said. "We'll bring the heat to them." Martha tried to stand, but her legs buckled. Mrs. Sullivan caught her. "You've done enough," she whispered. "Let someone carry you now." And for the first time in weeks, Martha let herself be a child again. The wind outside still howled, but inside the Sullivan cabin it was silent, silent like prayer. A sled through fire and frost. The sled cut through the snow like a whisper in silence. Mr. Sullivan leaned forward, hands tight on the reins, guiding the strong old mule named Molly through the thick drifts. Behind him sat Martha, bundled in more blankets than she had ever worn in her life. Her face peeked out between the wool, cheeks still pink from frostbite, eyes heavy but alert. In the back of the sled, stacked carefully and tied down with rope, were lifelines. Chopped firewood, a box of dried beans, old clothes, and jars of Mrs. Sullivan's root tea. But most precious of all was the small cast-iron stove Mr. Sullivan had unbolted from his workshop that morning. It would not burn bright like the Sullivan hearth, but it would be enough. Martha didn't speak. Her lips were cracked, and the words in her chest were too full of gratitude and cold to come out. So she watched the snow, watched the shadows stretch over the plains, watched the wind move in shapes only she seemed to understand. Mr. Sullivan broke the silence. "Your daddy helped me build my first barn," he said. "Didn't ask for a thing in return, just said, 'We all stand taller when we hold each other up.'" Martha looked up at him. He didn't look back. Just flicked the reins and kept going. The journey back took longer than expected. The snow was deeper, and the mule tired quickly. Halfway there, the sun started to dip. A sky that was blue just hours ago turned gray, then silver, then the color of ash. Then the wind returned. It howled through the trees, sharp and sudden. Mr. Sullivan muttered something under his breath. He didn't want to stop, but he also knew what came next. A squall, fast, blinding snow. Wind that could peel the skin off a man's face if he wasn't careful. "We'll rest behind those rocks," he said, pointing toward a jagged cluster of stone jutting out from the earth like broken teeth. "Can't risk getting lost in this." They pulled over, and Martha helped him wrap a thick wool tarp over the sled. He dug into the supply crate and pulled out 2 lanterns, one for each of them. For the next hour, they sat side by side in silence. Until Martha asked, "Do you think Samuel will be okay?" Mr. Sullivan didn't answer right away. He turned the wick down low on his lantern and said, "If there's one thing I've learned out here, it's that the smallest fires sometimes burn the longest." Martha nodded slowly. She understood. Her brother's body may have been small and weak, but his heart was stubborn, just like hers. When the snow eased, they pressed on. By the time the cabin came into view, night had already wrapped its long arms around the world. But the sight of that little square home, buried in white and nearly forgotten by the rest of the world, lit something inside Martha's chest. Home. She jumped down from the sled before it even stopped, legs stumbling through, the snow calling out, "Mama!" The door opened, and Eleanor ran out barefoot, dress whipping in the wind. She caught Martha mid-run and fell to her knees in the snow, sobbing and laughing at once. Behind them, Mr. Sullivan was already hauling the stove inside. "I brought the sun with me," he said with a wink. Inside, the world changed. The new stove was installed in minutes. The fire took seconds to catch, and when it did, it filled the room with more than heat. It filled it with life. Samuel's cheeks turned pink. Within the hour, his cough softened. He opened his eyes and whispered, "Warm." Eleanor wept again. They fed him syrup and tea, wrapped him in blankets that smelled of pine wood and rosemary. Eleanor kissed his forehead over and over, as if to anchor him to the living. That night, they didn't just survive. They rested, and in that sleep, for the first time in many days, none of them dreamed of snow. They dreamed of spring, the frozen hour. The morning after the fire roared to life, the cabin no longer smelled like desperation. It smelled like wood smoke, boiled beans, and something Eleanor had almost forgotten: hope. For the first time in weeks, she moved through the house with something close to purpose. She hung the wet socks by the new stove, pressed her hand to Samuel's forehead, and found only warmth. He was breathing better, eating again. He even smiled. Outside, the wind had quieted. But in the frontier, silence never lasted long. Martha stood near the porch, watching the plains. The world stretched, wide and white, untouched except for their own footprints and a thin line of sled tracks now filling with snow. She wasn't looking for anything in particular. She just felt the need to look. Something deep inside her, maybe the same thing that had carried her to the Sullivans, told her the land always spoke first, before the trouble arrived. By noon, Eleanor heard the first knock. It was a soft one. Not rushed, not frantic, just tired. She opened the door to find a girl standing there, maybe 16, maybe younger. Her boots were cracked and soaked. Her scarf was made of two different fabrics, sewn together. and her hands, red, blistered, trembling, clutched a bundle too tightly. "My name's June," the girl said. "Ma told me to run. Our cabin roof caved in. She said to find help." Eleanor didn't hesitate. She pulled the girl in and slammed the door behind her. Within minutes, Martha brought her a bowl of broth, and June unwrapped the bundle. It wasn't supplies. It was her baby sister, tiny, blue-lipped, barely crying. Eleanor and Martha worked fast, using the last dry towels to warm the baby's body. They placed her beside Samuel near the stove, and Martha gently sang an old Irish lullaby her father used to hum. Eleanor fed June the last of the hard bread without comment. "We're too many for this cabin," Eleanor whispered later to herself, but she didn't mean it. Not really. That evening, Martha asked June about her mother. She stayed. "Behind," June said, voice cracking. "Said the horses wouldn't pull more than one sled in this snow. Pa's gone. Buried last fall." "We'll go back for her," Eleanor promised. "First light." The sun rose behind gray clouds the next morning. Mr. Sullivan returned just before breakfast, checking on them with another crate of food strapped to his back. When Eleanor told him about June's mother, he didn't even blink. "Let's ride." They took both mules, loaded only what was needed. Eleanor didn't let Martha go, though she begged. June stayed behind, too, feeding her sister a bottle warmed over the fire. The wind picked up again by noon. Eleanor and Mr. Sullivan hadn't returned. Then came the storm. Hard, fast, blinding. It swept across the plains like a wall. Visibility vanished. The windows frosted from the inside. The door shuddered and groaned under the pressure. Martha lit both lanterns and kept them near the stove. June held her baby close, eyes wide with fear. "They'll be okay," Martha whispered. "They have the mules. They have each other." But hours passed. No sign of them. Night fell like a curtain. Thick. Absolute. Then the lanterns flickered. The fire coughed. The room darkened, and the cold returned. Not through the door, not through the walls, but through the heart. Martha stepped outside just for a second to listen. The wind had taken her father's voice once. She knew its language. This time it didn't speak, it screamed. The storm did not pass that night. It stayed, pressing its weight against the walls of the cabin like an angry hand. Snow slapped the windows, and the wind shrieked like a wild animal. Inside, the children huddled close to the failing fire. Martha kept feeding it what little remained: splinters, dry cloth, even an old book they had never finished reading. Samuel's cough had returned. June's baby whimpered every few minutes. Her tiny body curled close to her sister's chest. No one spoke. Words would not change what was happening. They only took energy. At some point in the early hours, the fire died. The cold returned like a thief in the dark. Martha stood up and grabbed the last candle. She lit it with a shaking hand, shielding the flame with her fingers. It flickered, barely alive. The light made the room look smaller, walls leaning in, shadows stretched long across the floor. "They should be back," June whispered. Martha nodded, but they weren't, and the truth none of them said out loud. Maybe they never would be. By morning, the wind slowed. Not silence, but something like it. The kind of quiet that follows screaming. Martha dressed in every layer she could find. The wind had stolen her scarf, but she tied a wool blanket around her face. She boiled water and made June drink some. Fed Samuel a spoonful of jam left over in a jar. Then she opened the door. She wasn't going to wait anymore. "Martha," June's voice cracked behind her. "I'll only go as far as the tree line," she said. "If I see tracks, I'll follow." She stepped out, boots sinking deep. The snow was high, up to her thighs in places. She gritted her teeth and pushed forward, her breath a cloud in front of her. The world was white, blinding, but her eyes were sharp now, trained to look for what others missed, and then she saw them. Tracks, 2 sets, sled rails, but only one direction, not coming toward the cabin, going away. Martha's heart skipped. She followed the tracks slowly, step by step. They led west, away from the Sullivan cabin, away from June's home, away from everyone. And then they stopped. At a ridge. Below it, nothing but a wide sheet of ice. A frozen pond. And in the middle, the sled turned over. She slid down the ridge without thinking, snow filling her boots. She ran, legs burning, lungs screaming. "Ma!" she shouted. "Mr. Sullivan!" No answer. The sled was broken, supplies scattered. One of the mule traces was snapped, and then she saw it. A glove, Eleanor's glove. Beside it, boot prints, leading toward the trees, still fresh, still deep. She followed. She found them less than a mile in, under a thick pine, covered in snow, but alive. Mr. Sullivan had wrapped Eleanor in the tarp. His face was bleeding, a cut across his temple, but he was awake. "We lost the trail," he whispered. One mule panicked, broke loose, sled flipped. "Eleanor!" She hit her head. Eleanor's face was pale. Her eyes fluttered. But her hand reached out weakly and found Martha's coat. "You came," she breathed. Martha knelt, tears stinging her cheeks. "I'm here, Mama. I'll get you home." She built a fire using dry pine needles and bark. It was small, but it burned. She wrapped Eleanor tighter and fed Mr. Sullivan sips of water, and then she did what she had done before. She walked home alone. The second rescue could not wait. This time she wasn't the one needing saving. She was the one bringing the light. Martha moved like a shadow through the snow. She didn't remember feeling her feet. The cold had taken them long ago. Her arms ached from the strain of pulling the sled behind her, one she had built herself from spare wood and the broken harness Mr. Sullivan had left behind. Her hands were red, raw, but they gripped the ropes tightly. On that sled lay hope. Wrapped in 2 quilts and the salvaged tarp were Eleanor and Mr. Sullivan, both unconscious, both breathing, but barely. The small fire she had left with them had kept the frost from finishing its work, but only just. Now it was Martha's turn to become the fire. Step by step, she pulled them forward. She knew the route, the ridge, the break in the fence, the hollowed elm tree that pointed toward home. She had walked it twice before, but never like this. Not while pulling 2 lives behind her, not as a child standing in place of every adult who hadn't made it home. She didn't cry. She couldn't. Tears would freeze before they fell. The sun was low when the cabin finally appeared, its roof just visible above the white. Smoke still came from the chimney. They had kept the fire going. Good. She called out before she reached the porch. A weak cry, but enough. June burst through the door, her face full of shock and disbelief. "Oh, God," she whispered, running toward the sled. "Oh, God, Martha, how did you—" "We have to get them inside," Martha said. "Now." It took. everything they had to carry the bodies indoors. June's legs buckled more than once, but they didn't stop. Samuel watched from his cot, silent, wide-eyed. June placed Eleanor near the stove, carefully unwrapping the tarp and checking her breathing. Mr. Sullivan groaned, still alive. Martha collapsed near the wall, her body shivering uncontrollably. Not from cold, but from everything else. Every ounce of will she had used to hold herself together now let go. June knelt beside her. "You saved them," she whispered. "No," Martha muttered. "They're not saved yet." Night fell again. But this night, something different happened. Lanterns appeared, one by one, outside the cabin. From the east, then the north, men on foot, women with shawls pulled tight, children carrying blankets. The community had seen the smoke, had heard the wind, had waited long enough. They came with food, with medicine, with extra firewood and hands that knew what to do. They came because one little girl had walked through death 3 times and lit a trail for the rest to follow. Eleanor awoke before dawn. Her first words were, "Is Martha safe?" And from the corner, wrapped in 3 coats, cheeks pink and eyes tired, Martha smiled. "I'm here, Mama." And for the first time since winter began, Eleanor wept not from fear, but from awe, because her daughter was no longer a child. She was the girl who brought the lanterns, the girl who taught the snow to make way, the girl who carried warmth through the cold. The circle. They built spring came slow that year. It didn't burst in with flowers or green grass. It crept, one drop of melt water at a time, one icicle falling, one crow's caw echoing through thawing trees. But it came, and with it came the stories. They spread across the valley, from cabin to cabin, past fields still buried in snow and rivers cracking awake. Everyone heard what Martha Marlowe had done, about the girl who walked through the storm, about the baby saved, the mother rescued, the man brought home half dead, and they called her brave. But Martha didn't feel brave. She felt tired. Eleanor's recovery was slow. Her memory came back in pieces, and she sometimes forgot what day it was. Mr. Sullivan returned to his home with a cane and a scar across his forehead. He stopped talking about weather and started talking about Grace. The Marlowe. cabin became a place people visited, not just out of kindness, but reverence. Every family that had ever lost someone to the cold brought something: a pan of biscuits, a new lantern, a letter. June and her baby sister never left. They became part of the household like they'd always belonged. Samuel grew stronger and began to sing again. And one day in late March, when the ground was still half ice and half mud, something unexpected happened. The whole valley gathered. Dozens of families. They met in the clearing behind the Marlowe cabin, with tools and wood and plans. "What's this?" Eleanor asked from her rocking chair. No one answered. They built through the afternoon, quietly, purposefully. By sunset it stood tall, a circle of stones, a carved wooden sign above it, the lantern circle, and beneath it, "In honor of Martha Marlowe, the girl who warmed the valley." Martha stood in the middle of it, stunned. She didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. She just lit the first lantern. And when she did, every other family lifted theirs, one by one, until the entire clearing glowed, a warm fire against the endless cold, a signal that the season had changed. Not just the weather, but the people. Martha looked at her mother, at June, at Samuel, and she finally let herself believe it. They had survived. And they had done more than that. They had built something that could never freeze. Hope. The warmest winter Martha stood at the edge of the lantern circle one morning in April, her boots sinking slightly into the thawing ground. The snow was nearly gone now. Only stubborn patches clung to the shadows, like ghosts not quite ready to leave. Birds had returned. Their songs sounded strange, almost too joyful after months of wind and silence. She closed her eyes and breathed in. The air was still cold, but it no longer bit. It carried the scent of wet bark, damp soil, and something she hadn't smelled since last fall: life. Around her, the valley stirred back to motion. People were repairing fences, digging trenches, gathering in small groups to plan spring planting. It was the same place, but something had shifted. They walked differently now, spoke slower, looked each other in the eyes more often, held children closer. And when they passed the lantern circle, they touched the stones. as if remembering mattered more than ever. Inside the cabin, Eleanor had returned to her sewing. Samuel had begun carving animals out of scrap wood. June, older now than her years, hummed lullabies to her sister without needing to think. And Martha? She watched and wondered. One day, a man arrived in a black coat with gold buttons. He was from the county. He had a camera. He asked questions. He had heard the stories, too, but he didn't understand them. He wrote in a book. He took Martha's picture. He asked how she had done it. Walked through storms, built sleds, saved lives. She didn't know how to answer. "It wasn't just me," she said. "But you were the first," he replied. She thought about that for a long time. The next day she returned to the tree line alone. She stood where she had once seen the overturned sled. The trees were quiet now, snow melt dripping from their arms. She knelt and placed something in the soil, a piece of wood, carved by Samuel. It was a lantern, small, simple, but it marked the place where she stopped being a child, where everything changed. Week later, the valley held a spring gathering, not a funeral, not a mourning, a celebration. They called it the warming. Children chased each other between the trees. Baskets overflowed with boiled potatoes and dried fruit. Music floated through the clearing, rough, off-key fiddle and all, and when the sun dipped low, they lit the lantern circle again. Every family brought a new one, dozens now, flickering, like the stars had come down to rest in the valley's arms, and this time Martha didn't light the first one. She lit the last, because sometimes the brightest flame is the one that watches all the others glow. What the fire left behind. The seasons shifted for real that year. Spring melted into summer, not with a flood, but with patience. Flowers rose like cautious hands. Trees budded slowly. The valley remembered how to be warm, and people remembered how to be people again. But healing, Martha learned, wasn't always quiet. Sometimes it came with questions, with choices. And one of those choices arrived in the form of a letter. It came in a brown envelope from the county office. Martha's name written in block letters. Inside, a scholarship offered by a women's college 2 states away. It included a train ticket, a dormitory bed, a promise of something more than survival. Eleanor sat with the letter for a long time before speaking. "You've earned this," she said. Martha looked at her hands. They didn't look like scholars' hands. They looked like they still belonged to the girl who had pulled a sled through a blizzard. "But I don't know how to be anything else," she whispered. Eleanor touched her cheek. "That's not true," she said. "You knew how to be a hero before you had anyone to teach you. That means you can learn anything." That summer, the valley changed again. New families moved in. Roads were widened. A post office opened. The Marlowe's cabin, once the loneliest on the edge of the map, became the heart of something growing, and with every change came a new kind of ache. The ache of letting go. June was the first to speak it aloud. "You're thinking about leaving." Martha nodded. "I don't want to," she said. "But I think I have to." Before she left, she visited each place the storm had touched. The broken fence she once followed. The tree line where she found Eleanor. The pond where the sled flipped. And the ridge above it, where the wind had screamed. At each stop, she placed a small lantern Samuel had carved. No ceremony, no farewell, just a light. Because some memories don't need words. They just need warmth. The night before the train was set to leave, the valley lit the lantern circle again. But this time something was different. Each lantern had a note tied beneath it. One read, "You reminded me to hold my daughter longer." Another, "Because of you, my family stayed one more night and lived." Another, "You showed us how strong we can be when we don't wait to be rescued." Martha didn't cry, not until she saw the last one. It was from Samuel. It simply said, "You were never small to me." And so at sunrise, with a heavy heart and a steady hand, Martha boarded the train. The valley faded into mist, but behind her she left a trail of lanterns, and inside her, the fire stayed lit. The girl who lit the map. The train cut across the land like a needle through fabric, sewing together towns Martha had only ever heard about in letters or passing conversations. She sat by the window, her breath fogging the glass every few minutes, eyes drinking in each passing mile. She had never been this far from the valley, never seen a horizon without her mother's cabin in it. The city, when it arrived, was louder than anything she had known. It smelled like coal and ink and bread and dreams. Strangers rushed past her, eyes filled with urgency, coats long and dark, shoes polished like mirrors. But Martha didn't shrink. She walked forward, boots still worn from the winter, coat still patched at the elbow. She had carried people through storms. She could carry herself now. At the college, she was a curiosity at first. The girl from the newspaper story, the survivor, the miracle child. But stories fade quickly in the city. What didn't fade was her presence, the way she listened, the high way she stood when no one else did, the way she asked hard questions. Professors noticed. So did classmates. One by one, they stopped seeing her as the girl from the storm and started seeing her as someone shaping the weather ahead. She studied medicine, and every time she touched a patient's wrist to find a pulse, she remembered holding Samuel's hand by the fire. Every time she sat with someone who was afraid, she remembered June's trembling fingers clutching a bundle too small to cry. And every time she lit a lamp in the clinic's back room, she thought of the lantern circle. Years passed. She returned to the valley once every spring. Samuel grew into a carpenter. June opened a school. The baby, her name was Mercy, grew into the kind of girl who ran faster than the wind and asked questions that made grown men stammer. The cabin remained. So did the circle. More lanterns were added, some in memory, some in thanks. One night, during her 5th visit back, Martha arrived to find someone had carved a new stone at the center of the circle. It read, "The storm came for her." She walked through it and left the fire behind. Eventually, Martha opened a clinic in a mountain town 2 valleys over. She hung lanterns there, too. People asked why. She only smiled. "You'll understand when the storm comes," she said, and they did. One year, during a deep freeze, a mother brought in a child wrapped in curtains. Frostbite had touched her ears, her hands, but the fire inside her had not gone out. Martha treated her gently, bandaged her wounds, fed her soup. And when the girl whispered, "I thought no one would help," Martha said the words her mother once told her. "You were never alone. You just hadn't found the light yet." And so, the lanterns spread, not just through the valley, but across counties, across borders, across hearts. Every winter somewhere, someone would remember the girl who didn't wait for rescue, They would tie a note beneath a flame, and someone else would read it, and they would survive. And more than that, they would live.